So, here's how everything went down. Sophie and I had been together for a while before things started to take a turn. She got this amazing job offer at a law firm, big league stuff, the kind most people only dream about. We were living in a small, comfortable town, and life was fine. I had my job, friends, and family nearby. Pretty standard stuff. But Sophie? She was always hustling. Always talking about becoming a partner, getting ahead, making a name for herself. And yeah, I supported her. What kind of husband wouldn't? But when she got that job in another city, it all changed. She was ecstatic, totally thrilled. Me? I felt like everything I knew was being ripped away. My family, my friends, all of it gone. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the one holding her back. We were supposed to be a team, right? At least that's what I thought. So, we packed up, left everything behind, and moved to this big city. The city was exciting, sure, but it was also overwhelming. And as soon as we arrived, it felt like I didn't even recognize Sophie anymore. She dove headfirst into work, like it was all she had. Working late, always talking about the partners and legal cases, buried in legal briefs. I'd see her at the end of the day, but it was like she was a million miles away. Meanwhile, I was struggling. Finding a job in a new city is no walk in the park. I applied everywhere, had a few interviews, and after what felt like forever, I finally landed a position at a marketing firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. The problem? My boss, Dylan, was a real piece of work. He nitpicked everything I did. Nothing was ever good enough. He'd call me into his office, look at me like I was a failure, and point out every tiny mistake. I was trying to make it work, but it was tough, especially when I came home every night and saw Sophie excelling at her job while I was stuck with this jerk of a boss. Things started to feel like a bad joke, and Sophie was changing too. At first, I told myself it was just the stress of her job. She was working late and coming home exhausted. I tried to be understanding. I even cooked dinner sometimes, even though I wasn't the best at it. I tried to have the conversations we used to have, but she wasn't interested. There were nights she'd come home, eat in silence, and then retreat to her laptop like I wasn't even in the room. I kept telling myself it was just her job, that she was stressed and needed time to adjust. She'd worked so hard to get here, but something felt off. It wasn't just her work that had her distracted. It was like she was pulling away from me, and I could feel it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her on her phone or laptop, typing away, like I wasn't even there. We stopped talking. Scratch that, barely talked anymore. The woman I married, the one I used to joke around with and share everything with, was slowly fading away, and I had no idea how to stop it. It felt like an invisible wall was going up between us, brick by brick, and I couldn't get through. The worst part? I couldn't even say anything. What was I supposed to say? Hey, you're being distant, and I feel like I'm losing you? Yeah, that would have sounded pathetic. So, I kept it all inside, telling myself maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. She was working hard for us, right? For our future. That's what I told myself every day. But even with all that self-talk, I couldn't shake that feeling. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where things went wrong. We were supposed to be a team, but it felt like I was playing this game alone. Then, there were the comparisons. I couldn't help it. Sophie was climbing the ladder, making waves in her firm, probably catching the attention of all the right people, while I was getting chewed out by Dylan every day. It started eating at me. I was supposed to be happy for her, proud even, but how could I feel that way when my own life was falling apart? Every time I saw Sophie so focused and driven, I felt small, like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't man enough. It wasn't her fault, not directly. She never said anything to make me feel that way, but her actions spoke louder than words. She was laser-focused on her career, and it felt like I was just tagging along, hoping for a scrap of success. There were nights I thought about confronting her, sitting her down to talk about what was happening between us. But then I'd see her come home, exhausted, glued to her laptop, and I'd back off. She didn't need more stress. She didn't need me complaining about how I felt when she had deadlines and cases to deal with. So, I just let it go. But inside, it was eating me alive. I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Because once you admit something's wrong, it's out there. You can't take it back. And that's where things stood. Me in a city I didn't want to be in, working a job I didn't like, with a wife who was slipping away from me. But even then, I still held on to hope. Stupid, right? I still believed that things would turn around, that once she got settled in her job, we'd reconnect. I thought it was just a phase, that the distance between us would close. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The holidays were approaching, and the company I worked for decided to throw a big corporate party, the usual end-of-year event. It was basically mandatory for everyone to bring their spouses. I figured this would be my chance to make things right with Dylan, the guy who'd been riding me for months. I thought that if I could show Dylan I had everything under control, maybe he'd stop nitpicking me. Plus, I was hoping taking Sophie to the party would give us a chance to reconnect. Things had been tense between us at home, and I thought this might be the perfect opportunity to reset things. But Sophie wasn't exactly jumping at the idea. When I asked her, she gave me that look. You know, the one that said she already had enough on her plate. She told me she had a mountain of work to do, with deadlines closing in. I wasn't exactly shocked by that. She'd been glued to her laptop, working day and night. All we ever talked about was her cases. But I pressed her. I told her it would be good for us to step away from work and spend time together for once. She hesitated, but eventually, she agreed to go. Honestly, I was relieved. I really needed this. The night of the party, though, I felt like a bundle of nerves. Not because of Sophie, but because of Dylan. That guy had been a thorn in my side since day one. Always finding some little thing to tear down. If I could just get through the night without him grilling me about my work, I'd call it a success. When we arrived, the place was packed. People were already a little tipsy, laughing too loudly, plastering fake smiles for the cameras. It was one of those corporate events where everyone pretends to be friends because the boss is watching. I grabbed a drink for Sophie and tried to introduce her to some of my coworkers, but she wasn't really into it. I couldn't blame her. She didn't know these people, and it wasn't exactly her crowd. Still, I hoped as the night wore on, she'd loosen up. I stepped away for a minute to grab more drinks. I was gone for maybe 5 minutes. But when I came back, I saw her talking to Dylan. Something about it instantly set me off. It wasn't that they were doing anything inappropriate, just having a conversation. But the way she was smiling at him, laughing at whatever he was saying, didn't sit right with me. I tried to act cool as I walked over, but as soon as I got there, Dylan flashed this slimy grin and said, "You've got a great wife, Liam." It was meant to be a compliment, I guess, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. It was like he knew something I didn't. I tried to brush it off. What was I supposed to do? Call him out on a compliment? So, I smiled, made some small talk, and moved on. But that weird feeling stuck with me for the rest of the night. After the party, things started to shift in a way I didn't expect. Dylan, the guy who had been on my case for months, suddenly acted like my biggest supporter. He stopped picking apart every little thing I did and started complimenting my ideas in meetings. It felt too good to be true. One day, out of nowhere, he called me into his office and offered me a promotion. Just like that. I should have been over the moon. I should have been celebrating. But something felt off. The promotion came way too easily. It was too convenient. I hadn't done anything special to earn it, but instead of questioning it, I let myself get swept up in the success. After months of struggling, finally being recognized felt too good to question. For the first time since we moved here, things were looking up for me. I told myself I deserved this. I'd worked hard, hadn't I? But even as my career seemed to take off, things with Sophie kept getting worse. She was pulling away more than ever. She stopped telling me about her day or the cases she was working on. Whenever I asked, she'd give me these short, cold answers like she didn't even want to talk to me. It wasn't just the conversations drying up. Our whole relationship felt like it was falling apart. She spent more time at work, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone or laptop. Some nights, she wouldn't come to bed until after midnight. When I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off, telling me I was overthinking everything. But I wasn't overthinking. Something was off, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch. She was stressed, and this would pass. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, A little voice in the back of my mind kept telling me something had changed. And it wasn't just the job. Maybe it was the way Dylan looked at her at the party. Maybe it was the way she'd started acting distant ever since. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew something wasn't right. I didn't have proof, no solid reason to doubt her. But that gut feeling just wouldn't go away. Every time she stayed late at work, every time she avoided my questions, the feeling got stronger. I tried to ignore it, focused on my promotion and how things were finally looking up at work. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake that doubt. And here's the thing. When you start doubting someone you love, it eats at you. It spreads like a poison, poisoning everything. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. I'd hear her phone buzz in the middle of the night, and I'd wonder if it was just a work email or something else. I hated myself for thinking like that, but I couldn't stop. The worst part? I didn't know how to confront her. I didn't have any real evidence to go on. If I asked her, she'd just say I was being paranoid. And maybe I was. But that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. So, I stayed quiet, told myself it was just a rough patch, that it would pass. I focused on my job, on the promotion, on anything to distract myself from the doubt. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the distance between us kept growing. And deep down, I knew things were about to get much worse. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought inviting Dylan and his wife, Hannah, over for dinner would clear up the tension I'd been feeling for weeks. How else could I ease my doubts, right? If I could get Dylan into our home, see how he interacted with Sophie, maybe I'd realize I was just being paranoid. Plus, it was a chance to smooth things over with my boss. If I could keep things professional and easy at work, maybe everything else would fall into place. Sophie wasn't thrilled about hosting. "You know how busy I am, Liam," she said, that tone creeping into her voice, like I was the unreasonable one. But I convinced her it was necessary. The night of the dinner came, and at first, everything felt normal. I greeted Dylan and Hannah at the door, trying to act like everything was fine, even though inside, I was mentally running the calculations. Every look, every word exchanged between them. It was all too much. Sophie was the perfect hostess, flashing smiles, setting up drinks, and making small talk with Hannah for a moment. I let myself believe everything was fine, that I was just imagining things. But as the night wore on, I started picking up on the subtle things. It wasn't my imagination. I wasn't being paranoid. Every now and then, I'd catch Dylan glancing at Sophie, not in a casual, friendly way, but with a look that seemed like they were sharing a secret, some unspoken bond, a joke that didn't need words. And Sophie? She wasn't shy about it either. Their conversation flowed so naturally, like they were on the same wavelength in a way that made my stomach twist. They found every opportunity to steer the conversation back to work, their shared ambitions, their cases. Hannah and I were just there in the background, like we didn't even matter. I kept telling myself it was all in my head. What proof did I have? Nothing. But as the night went on, that feeling, the one I'd been pushing away for weeks, grew stronger. Something wasn't right. When Dylan and Hannah finally left, I asked Sophie what she thought of the evening. She gave me a half-hearted response. It was fine. Then she immediately went back to her laptop, like nothing had happened. I sat there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. She was right in front of me, but it felt like she was already gone. The trust, the connection. We were slipping further apart with every passing minute. A few days later, Dylan didn't show up to work. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it, but my mind was already racing. I sent him an email about some project details, but there was no response. By lunchtime, I realized I'd forgotten it was my turn to pick up our daughter from school. With everything piling up at work, I tried calling Sophie, thinking maybe she could grab her instead. I dialed her number and waited. Nothing. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. That familiar, gnawing feeling, the one I had been ignoring for weeks, came crashing down on me. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My head spun with thoughts I didn't want to think, and my heart raced like I was on the verge of something I couldn't come back from. When I got home that evening, Sophie was already in bed. Our daughter was asleep, and the house was quiet. But I wasn't quiet. My mind was chaotic, spinning with the worst possible scenarios. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I needed to stop wondering and find out the truth once and for all. I walked into our bedroom, heart pounding. Sophie was asleep. Her phone was charging on the nightstand. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at it, my hands trembling. I had never done anything like this before. I'd never even considered invading her privacy. But something inside me snapped. I had to know what was going on. I picked up her phone, unlocked it, and went straight to her messages. My hands shook so badly, I could barely hold it. And then, as I scrolled through the conversation between her and Dylan, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened. They weren't just talking casually. These texts were flirtatious, explicit, and cruel. They were making fun of me. Dylan called me a loser, like I was some clueless idiot who didn't deserve my wife. And Sophie? She didn't defend me. She laughed. She joked about how easy it was to hide things from me. Dylan boasted about how good it felt to be with her, how they had to be careful because of the firm, but it was worth the risk. Sophie responded with emojis, flirtatious comments, things that made my stomach turn. In that moment, the world around me shattered. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. I had been a fool all these months. Those little doubts I'd pushed aside, they were right. I had been right all along. And now, here was the undeniable proof. The woman I loved, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, had betrayed me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake her up and demand answers. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, shatter it into 1,000 pieces, just like she had shattered my trust. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the need to stay in control. I'm not sure, but instead of confronting her right then and there, I decided to play it smart. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I put her phone back exactly where I found it and quietly left the room. My heart was still racing, but now it wasn't just anger or hurt. It was something darker. A quiet voice inside me whispered, "Don't show your hand just yet." I needed time. I needed a plan. If Sophie thought she could get away with this, if Dylan thought he could humiliate me like this, they were in for a rude awakening. I went downstairs, my mind already working overtime. I wasn't going to be the guy they laughed at. I wasn't going to sit back and let them play me for a fool. No, I was going to make them regret this. The morning after I found those texts, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee like it was going to give me some answer. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Sophie right away, scream at her, throw everything into the open, but that wouldn't solve anything. It would only give her and Dylan a chance to spin their lies, cover their tracks. I needed something bigger, something that would leave them with no way out. That's when I thought of Hannah, Dylan's wife. If I was going to take these two down, I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who had just as much to lose as I did. And Hannah, she had no idea what was happening behind her back, or at least that's what I thought at the time. I sent her a message that morning, asking if we could meet up. I kept it vague, just saying it was about work. She agreed, probably thinking I wanted to talk about Dylan or the office or something equally boring. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, somewhere we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. The last thing I needed was for this to get back to Sophie before I was ready. When I arrived, Hannah was already sitting at a small table by the window, looking as put together as always. She was one of those women who always seemed to have everything in order. But when I sat down and looked her in the eye, I could tell something was off. Maybe she sensed it, the way we all do when something's wrong in our marriages. What I was about to show her was going to change everything. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my hands shaking under the table. This was it. There was no turning back once I started. She smiled, though there was confusion in her eyes. "Of course. Is everything okay?" she asked. I didn't waste any time. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and slid it across the table to her. "Take a look at this." She glanced down, her brow furrowing as she started reading the messages. For a few moments, she didn't react. It was like her brain was struggling to process what she was seeing. Then, her face shifted. First came shock, then hurt, and then anger. "Roland, he's been with her," she whispered, her voice breaking. She looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. How long has this been going on? I don't know, I said, shaking my head. But now I've got proof. She sat back, blinking rapidly like she was trying to fight back the tears, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. I always had a feeling, she said quietly after a long pause. Dylan's been different for months, but I never had anything to go on. Not until now. The silence between us was thick, heavy. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind of quiet. It was the kind where two people are trying to figure out how to move forward after their whole world has just been torn apart. And then something changed in her. It was like a switch flipped. I saw it in her eyes. The same thing I had felt in my gut when I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen anymore. She wasn't just devastated. She was furious. We can't let them get away with this, she said, her voice sharp, controlled, full of determination. I nodded in agreement, feeling the anger rise up inside me again. I've been thinking the same thing. We need a plan. That's when the idea came up, the cameras. It was brilliant. They thought they were so slick, sneaking around behind our backs. But if we could catch them in the act, if we could get solid proof, we wouldn't just have some damning text messages. We'd have undeniable evidence. We'll set up cameras in both our bedrooms, Hannah said, her voice growing colder. That's where they think they're safe, where they think they can hide. We'll catch them there, I said, nodding. I was in. This wasn't just about confronting Sophie anymore. It was about taking back control, about ensuring they couldn't lie their way out of it. It wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't care anymore. They had betrayed us. They had humiliated us. And they were going to pay. The rest of the day was spent making plans. We went out that afternoon and bought the cameras, small, discreet, easy to hide. Hannah was cold and methodical as we discussed the details, and I could see the fire in her eyes. She was determined. She wasn't just going to let this slide. She was in this just as much as I was, maybe even more. That night, I installed the camera in our bedroom. I hated every second of it. The fact that I was doing this, spying on my wife in our own home, it made me sick, but I knew it was the only way to get the proof I needed. I kept it together around Sophie, acting like everything was fine, even though my insides were burning with rage. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Every night, I'd lie in bed, wondering if tonight was going to be the night they made their mistake. I had to act like everything was normal, had to keep up the charade. All the while, I knew that any moment, the truth could come crashing down on my marriage. Hannah and I stayed in close contact, updating each other on the smallest details. But mostly, we waited and waited. It was like torture. But then, finally, the moment arrived. One night, after weeks of uncertainty, I got the notification on my phone from the camera. Sophie was home, but I wasn't. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened the app. There they were, Sophie and Dylan, together in our bedroom. I couldn't watch for long. The sight of it was too much, but I didn't need to watch any longer. I had all the proof I needed. I called Hannah right away. She was already checking her cameras, and sure enough, she confirmed it. Dylan had been at their house the same day. He'd been sneaking around with Sophie in their bedroom, too. It was almost poetic, in a sickening, twisted way. The next day, we met again. Same cafe, but everything felt different. We weren't just the betrayed spouses anymore. We were a team now, partners in this. I've got the footage, I said, sliding my phone across the table to her. Hannah looked at it for a moment, then nodded. So do I. Now what? I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my breathing. Now we make them regret ever thinking they could get away with this. We spent hours going over the plan. There were so many ways it could go wrong, but at that point, I didn't care. I was done being reasonable. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the pain they had caused us. When we left the cafe, we had one thing on our minds, to make them pay. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. They had destroyed our lives, our trust, everything, and now they were going to pay the price. The hotel room felt sterile, cold, despite its generic decor and the faint smell of fresh linens. I wasn't sure what I expected when Hannah suggested we meet here, but we both knew it was a neutral space. Our homes were too full of emotion. We needed a place detached from all that to think clearly, or at least, that was the idea. Hannah sat across from me, The weight of everything we had gone through hanging between us like a storm cloud waiting to burst. We had the evidence now. The footage. The undeniable proof. It was only a matter of time before Sophie and Dylan would face the consequences of what they'd done. Hannah poured us both a drink. Whiskey? No ice, she asked. I wasn't much of a drinker, but right then, it felt like the only way to push through the tension. To freedom, she said, raising her glass, her eyes glinting with something dark and determined. It wasn't joy or relief. It was something else, something raw, vindication, but also pain. To freedom, I echoed, though it didn't feel quite real. Sure, I wanted out of this mess, out of the lies and betrayal. But the idea of freedom felt far away, like something I couldn't fully grasp. The drink burned as it slid down my throat, but I barely noticed it. We spent the next while going over the plan one last time. The videos would be sent out anonymously, uploaded to a secure site, and shared with the right people. It wouldn't take long for the truth to spread, and soon enough, Sophie and Dylan's affair would be exposed for everyone to see. There would be no escaping it, no way to pretend it didn't happen. There would be no going back for them. Their careers, their reputations, everything they'd worked for, everything they thought was secure, was about to crumble, just like they had done to us. As we spoke, though, something shifted. The whiskey blurred the lines in my mind, and I felt the tension between Hannah and me shift, too. It wasn't just the anger or the desire for revenge anymore. It was something more primal, something darker than either of us had anticipated. We poured another round, then another. The drinks blurred everything, and the counting stopped. We weren't keeping track of anything anymore. We were both running on fumes, months of pain, betrayal, and frustration pushing us to the edge. The alcohol brought everything to the surface, raw and exposed. I could see it in her eyes, the same hurt, the same seething rage. And I knew she saw it in mine, too. At some point, Hannah moved closer, her knee brushing against mine under the table. I didn't pull away. I should have. Every rational part of me screamed at me to step back, but I didn't. In that moment, I stayed. I stayed because I was no longer thinking about what was right or wrong. I was thinking about everything I had lost, everything Sophie had torn apart, how she had chosen someone else, how she had turned me into a fool, how she had shattered everything we'd built. I thought about how maybe, just maybe, I deserved something for myself, something that wasn't tainted by betrayal. Hannah leaned in, her voice low, almost intimate. "We've both been through hell," she murmured, her breath warm against my ear. "Maybe we deserve better." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was swirling, not sure if it was the alcohol or the weight of what she was implying. The heaviness of the choice we were both facing pressed down on me. But before I could stop myself, the words slipped out of my mouth. "Maybe we do." She kissed me. It wasn't like before, hesitant and unsure. This time, it deepened quickly, fueled by everything we'd been holding back. It wasn't love, not even close. It was something darker, maybe revenge, maybe just a desperate need to feel something besides emptiness. I pulled away for a second, my conscience stirring. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe the last remnants of my moral compass. "Hannah, we shouldn't," I muttered, but she cut me off with a whisper, her voice hard. "They did this to us, Liam," she said. "They made us feel like this. We deserve this." And she was right, wasn't she? They had destroyed us. They had taken everything, our trust, our lives, and left us with nothing. So why shouldn't we take something for ourselves, just this once? Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my phone, opened the app, and pressed the button that would send the videos. One click. Everything was out there. The footage of Sophie and Dylan, exposed, was uploaded and sent out. There was no turning back now. A strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. They were going to pay. And then, the line blurred completely. Hannah and I crossed it. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't tender. It was filled with anger, with desperation, with the betrayal we'd both been carrying for months. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I didn't care. All I cared about was how it felt to finally take something back, something that had been stolen from me. Afterward, the room was quiet. Hannah lay beside me, breathing heavily, But neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both knew exactly what had just happened. It wasn't about us. It was about them. Sophie and Dylan. We had taken something back. But at what cost? The next morning, everything began to unravel. The video spread faster than I could have imagined. I hadn't even considered how quickly something like that could go viral. But it did. By midday, everyone in the office knew. People started whispering. Dylan was avoided, eyes darting to him when he wasn't looking. Sophie was feeling the heat, too. Her colleagues looked at her like she was some sort of pariah, cold, distant, like she was something that needed to be erased. Dylan cracked first. The company couldn't handle the scandal, not with someone like him at the center of it. They fired him quietly, but everyone knew what had happened. His career was shattered. Sophie wasn't far behind. The partners at her firm couldn't ignore it. She wasn't just an associate anymore. She was the woman who had slept with a married man, exposed for everyone to see. Her career crumbled. They both did. I should have felt victorious, like I had won, like I had finally gotten the justice I deserved. But as I sat there, watching it all unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, too. In my pursuit of revenge, had I become something darker? Someone I didn't recognize? I wasn't just the betrayed husband anymore. I was something colder, something harder. And when I glanced at Hannah, sitting beside me, staring at her phone in a daze, I realized that revenge doesn't heal anything. It doesn't fill the void left by betrayal. It only leaves you with the wreckage of who you used to be. That night, when I walked through the door, Sophie was waiting. She was pacing, frantic, her eyes wide. The moment she saw me, she exploded. "Why, Liam? Why would you do this?" she yelled, her voice breaking under the weight of her fury. I stared at her, feeling nothing but disgust. "Why? You cheated, Sophie. You thought you could just walk all over me, and I'd take it?" Her face twisted with frustration, her hands flailing. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it for us. For you. Dylan had influence, and I thought if I kept him happy, it would help your career." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You slept with my boss because you thought it would help me? You're pathetic, Sophie. Nothing justifies what you did." Her tears started to fall, but I didn't feel anything. No sympathy, no pity. Just the cold, hard truth that this marriage was over. That was the breaking point. The divorce was fast. No drama, no fights, just business. We sold the house, divided the assets, and signed the papers. Once it was done, I packed up and left. I couldn't stay in that city. I needed to start over, away from everything that had reminded me of her, of us. I moved back to my hometown. The air felt different there, lighter. I found work, something simple, nothing glamorous, but it was honest. I hit the gym again, spent more time with old friends, and slowly started feeling like myself. It took time, but the sting of betrayal faded. The memories of what Sophie had done, her lies, the humiliation, the rage, it all became less important. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I just wanted to move on. And I did. I let go of the anger, the pain. I found peace. No more secrets, no more lies. I had learned from the past, and it made me stronger. Sophie was just a chapter of my life, one that had ended. And now, I was ready for a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free.